Somebody tried to drag me out of the car. He shot me twice in the leg, and then I drove off. They shot my tires out and made it to a side street, got shot in the upper back. It was a mess. I was lucky to get out of there. But then a couple of families put themselves on the line to help me. This was in South Central LA. So none of that's in my book. I didn't go in there, but it's all kind of part of my bio.
From NCPR, welcome to Northwards. People, ideas, and conversations from and about Northern New York, Vermont, and beyond. I'm Mitch Teich.
Support for the Northwards podcast comes from the J.C. Steiniger and M.E. McDonald Charitable Fund at Adirondack Foundation, in support of the Adirondack Foundation, building stronger Adirondack communities.
Hey, Ethan Shanty is in the studio with us. Ethan, hi. You know, it is the time of year when we record Northwards in a studio, and the studio is too warm.
Oh yeah, I'm sweating in here, and I'm wearing shorts and a t-shirt. I'll take off the hat. Hold on.
Is that better?
Actually, it's kind of worse because now I've got to adjust my headphones.
Yeah, you know that. Well, that's. In fact, we're going to hear this in the interview today.
The problem with being bald,
right? The problem with being bald is that the headphones don't fit in the same way they would otherwise.
And it also makes you look somehow more bald.
Yeah, that's true. Right?
Have you ever catch your reflection in the glass here, and you go, "Huh, am I really that bald?" You are. I am too.
To this day, I'm convinced that the pattern in which I went bald was linked to having worn headphones for years.
Oh, okay. Did it start right at the crown and then spread out?
Yeah, you know, and I'm probably wrong. There's not a control to this experiment. You know,
right?
Like there's
not
not
at
a
all.
version of Mitch in an alternate universe where I don't wear headphones for 25 years, and we see what happens to my hair.
Well, I think that I can trace all of my my body's failings and my various afflictions to my career and my because I'm basically deaf. And I wear headphones all the time for my career. And I also play live music. And for a lot of years, I did not take care of my hearing the way that I should have, which is to say I didn't wear earplugs. My eyesight is really bad, and I spend all of my time staring at computers for my work and for my hobby.
Plus, there's that nose hair thing we were talking about.
There's the nose hair
yesterday.
thing, yeah, which my nose hairs have gotten longer as I've spent more and more time in radio stations. Is there some kind of like strange radiation coming from the boards?
Yeah, it's true. It leads to the nose hair mustache merger.
Oh my! Have you had that? It's terrible.
Well, I think anybody who has a mustache
and of a certain age.
runs into the problem where they're working on trimming their mustache, and then they realize that the thing they thought was a mustache hair is actually a nose hair.
Right, because something is tickling your nose, and you're trying to get your mustache out of the way, and then you realize, like, oh, I'm just tugging on nose hair.
That's why I carry tweezers everywhere I go.
That's why I get my nose hair waxed every 2 days. I don't, but today's guest does. But wait, before we get to the guest.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
Yeah, there's a great conversation about going bald coming up and nose hairs. But the dude that you're speaking with today.
We're talking about a guy who's talking about getting his nose hairs waxed.
So we're doing the meta thing already.
Right.
Oh. Podcasts about podcasts.
It all comes back to that Seinfeld episode where Kramer wants to, or in fact he does. He makes a coffee table book about coffee tables. The best part about it is that it comes with built-in legs, so it itself is a coffee table.
Is that a real Kramer thing?
It is a real Kramer
I
thing,
haven't seen that. I only ever watch Seinfeld when I'm cat sitting, which is real. I don't know why, but I just decided that Seinfeld is cat sitting time. At my friend's house. So I've seen maybe 3 seasons worth. I don't know.
And I haven't really watched Seinfeld in years, but that was one of the. I mean, you know, it was never a. I think everything on Seinfeld was a subplot, right?
Right. I love Metafiction. My first real experience with it that I was cognizant of, I was taking a Metafiction class in school. And, as I got through it, I realized that I had read some Metafiction before that and just didn't really know. And so for this Metafiction class, like every other college class, you have to buy textbooks from the college bookstore. And one of the very first books that we read, I believe it was called Agape Agape. And so I did the assigned reading for the day, and In metafiction, you're encountering all kinds of weird things, not just with the actual content of the text, but also maybe the formatting is really screwed up, like a book like House of Leaves. And so this book that I was supposed to be reading started in the middle of a sentence, and it kind of like, I think I read it cover to cover, and it just sort of like ended in the middle of a sentence, and I was like, okay. And also it felt like it was a young adult novel because the situations and the characters were not reading like it was supposed to be read by adults. And I was like, okay.
What a strange affectation this author has.
Exactly. And I was like, okay, so it's metafiction. I know that getting into it. So I'm trying to see what the theme is, and based on the conversation that the professor had with us as students beforehand. And so I go to the class and he's talking and people are raising their hands talking about the chapters, and I realized they read a completely different book than I did because none of the character names or situations match at all. And so I raised my hand. I was really like shy all the way through high school and in college. So like raising my hand and talking in class was a pretty rare thing, but I was just like, I have no idea what you are talking about. And my professor what was his name? It doesn't matter. He was like, well, okay, you did the reading, right? And I was like, yeah, I did the reading, not that. And so I came up and I showed him, and he was like, this is straight up just a different book. So what had happened was somehow the printing press had taken the guts of one book and put it inside the cover of another book.
It's just a special little Easter egg. For,
exactly, yeah. And it wasn't over then because another book that I had for the class, did the assigned reading, and then it was like a 20-chapter book. And then at the end of the 20th chapter, then it's chapter 17 again through chapter 20. So there are 3 extra chapters stuck in the back of the book, and that didn't happen to anyone else in the class.
Did you buy your textbooks from like Ollie's Bargain Outlet? Or...
There was a guy outside the student union with a trench coat open. So that was really weird. But ever since then, I've read a whole bunch of metafiction that I really love, like House of Leaves I already mentioned, and then sometimes you'll encounter it with books that you aren't really suspecting. I just read this book called Get Shorty by Elmore Leonard. So I thought, it'd just be like a fun page turner. And what I got actually was metafiction, because this guy goes to Hollywood and then he starts pitching movies to producers, and then those producers are editing the pitches that he is giving, but the pitches that he's giving to them are based on real life situations that he's encountered earlier in the book. So while he's like trying to make money as a new movie producer, the story that he is himself in is also being edited by other people. It was a lot of fun.
Well, and the best part of it is that they made it itself into a movie. So there's like another layer of metafiction to it.
Right, yeah, which I've not seen. I really do want to see. But you must have read some metafiction before too.
Well, including the book that we're going to hear about on today's show. This episode of Northwards, we chat with a guy named Jeff Kramer, who, as you'll hear, is a former journalist who wrote a book about a former journalist who was writing a book that involves a former journalist.
It's journalists all the way down.
Exactly right. And I feel especially good as somebody who was a journalist for many years doing this interview.
Wait, has any of the fiction that you've written been about journalists?
Well, I, as you were aware, I wrote what we would loosely call a novel.
It is a novel.
Well, is it a novel if it hasn't been published? Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
It's a novel in a drawer, and that drawer contains a thumb drive, and that thumb drive contains some pages, and those pages contain some words.
And those words are about thumb drives in desk drawers.
The novel I wrote some time ago was itself about a former journalist, but I wrote it while I was still a daily journalist. So I think the meta stops there.
Okay.
But anyway, Jeff Kramer
Yeah.
lives in Syracuse. He's reported for newspapers in various places around the country, some really interesting stories that you'll hear about in the interview. But somehow we got started by talking about I guess he wanted to know if there was any reason that the video from the call that we did would be used because he hadn't done his hair. The joke being that the joke being that he didn't have any hair, and then I took off my hat to reveal that
you are also bald.
We share a hairstyle. Yeah.
I like being bald. You know,
I do too. I think we should have a bald episode of Northwards.
I think we can make that happen. It's just I never knew what to do when I had hair. You know, I never looked good with hair.
You know, my son has hair. He has gotten far more involved in doing things to his hair than in my 56 years of life I have ever gotten involved in. Yeah, I think the best I could hope for when I had a full head of hair back through my teen years was that I remember which side I parted it on.
Right. Yeah. I never got that involved, and then I just grew my hair long, and then what do you do with your hair when it's long? It's just there. I didn't style it. I'm pretty sure the reason I'm bald is because of this job. Not this job, but being in radio, I definitely stressed my hair out of my head.
Totally. I remember I remember going to the guy that cut my hair in my first job in my first full-time job in radio, and I was like 25 years old, and he said, "Are you under a lot of stress?" Because apparently he was just pulling out big chunks of hair, and that made me even more stressed at the time because I was 25.
Anyway, Jeff Kramer.
Jeff Kramer, who's let's just pick up the conversation with hair.
And we're not on video because I didn't comb my hair.
Neither did I.
Okay.
I wear this hat or a hat when I do interviews typically because it makes the headphones fit better.
I would think so. Yeah. Yeah. It tends to get a little slippery up there sometimes.
Well, and as I was losing my hair over the course of this radio career that's gone on for 35 years so far, I described it as headphone pattern baldness. I
did a reading in Natick, Massachusetts, a book signing and a reading. I used to work in that area at the newspaper there, the Daily, when it was actually really good. And one of the reporters that I worked with attended. And he's the guy who first noticed that I was going bald. And he was standing over me while I was writing something. And he really proclaimed it to the world. He said, "Kramer, you're going bald." You don't want to hear that when you're 27 years old.
That was about the same for me, actually, yeah. But nor do you want people to think that your head is a spider on top of an egg.
Right. Well, you got to do something. And then luckily, that whole St. Baldrick's Day thing came along. And by then, I was in California. I was writing a column. I decided, I'm going to shave my head to do this as a column. And to my surprise, my head was a lot more evenly shaped than I thought it would be. I kind of was thinking it would be this lumpen mass up there. But it looked okay, so I just decided to keep it this way.
Yeah, that's the huge question, right? You have no idea what your head is going to look like bald until it's bald.
Until it's bald, yeah.
Yeah,
scary, terrifying.
My story of how I finally cut the cord, if you will, was so for 14 years I was the co-host of a daily public radio talk show in Milwaukee. And I knew my hair was going, and it got to the point where every time I interviewed somebody in the studio who was bald, I asked them for advice on when they decided it was time and how they did it. And finally, I just I kept going shorter and shorter at the Great Clips down the street from my house. And then one day I told Mr. Curtis, "Take as much of it off as you can, and I'll do the rest when I get home."
Well, something, I think that once you got to start asking, it's probably too late. I still do get my hair cut, but I have a guy I like in Syracuse here, and he has added to my routine occasional nose waxing. Have you heard of that?
I have not heard of nose waxing.
Yeah, well, he told me that I was in the core demographic for it, which I guess I took as a compliment. And they basically put a swab up there with glue, and then they jam some paper up there, and then they just rip it out, and all the nose hairs come with it. It's a painful experience, right? It's like a blast of pain, but it's over in a second till you got to go and do the other nostril. But it's effective. I get it done every 3 months now. And my life has really changed dramatically for the better.
Is it like an oil change or?
Yeah, yeah, you just don't have those tendrils coming out your nose anymore.
Well, before we start talking about the rogue hairs sticking off the top of my ear, I feel like we ought
Yeah.
to talk a little about the book, huh?
Sure, let's do that. Does
Um,
everybody know what it looks like?
all I know is it looks like everything else on my Kindle. So let's, even though we're not on video, let's see what it looks like.
I don't have it. I was a bad call. Can you give me a second to grab
Of
one?
course.
Will you edit that part out where I
Um,
just kind of skip away, or do you want me to bring? I can bring the computer with me.
well, you could, yeah, you could do a little play-by-play on where you're walking.
Yeah. Well, I'm walking right by the bar. That's an important piece of furniture, maybe the most important. Here it is. This is what it looks like, everybody.
Well, on the cover has a guy on
Yeah.
a typewriter who
Yeah.
has mud cinematically pouring over his head.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Well, that is, there's an existential mud that the main character Woody has trapped himself in. And then mud is also in the vernacular of the sand and gravel industry, mud is concrete that hasn't hardened yet. So they pour mud. That's what they do in those mixer trucks.
Well, and I feel like we can't have the conversation without maybe addressing the elephant in the room, which is that you are a former newspaper reporter turned novelist who has written a novel about a former newspaper reporter turned novelist who, in turn, is writing a novel about a soon to be former newspaper reporter. This is like the literary equivalent of standing in between mirrors.
You're really good. I don't even know if I could express it that clearly. Um, yes, there's a lot of there's some meta in this, and there are autobiographical notes. It takes off in a much different direction than my actual life, but the foundation of the story begins with some elements that are in place in my life. So it was kind of one of those, well, what if, what if I took the circumstances I'm in and what if I put them on steroids, and that's how this book came about, which is really, I mean, in full disclosure, it's a triumph of procrastination. I started it more than 20 years ago. And then I kind of threw in the towel because I got stymied on how to release the book that he's writing. Like, how do I keep releasing it to readers in a way that doesn't seem contrived and hokey? And I kind of kept running out of coincidences and ways to do it. And I just put it aside for a while. I wrote some plays, and that was great, but I couldn't get this thing out of my head. And then COVID came around, and I had no more excuses, nothing else to do, right? And social media had solved my problem. I mean, there are people doing exactly what Woody's doing, which they're writing novels in progress and posting them online as they go.
You did
So
not do that, though, correct?
no, I did not do it.
It also kind of makes it, you sort of alluded to this, it's a challenge to talk about. I was trying to describe the book to a colleague here and found myself saying things like, well, the middle newspaper reporter to explain who I was talking about.
Sinking in the mud, right? You're kind of,
Yeah.
well, what I have just kind of learned to say is it's about a laid off newspaper reporter who alienates his family with a novel that he's writing online, and that's enough to get the basics. And
Alienates is kind of a gentle way to put.
oh, sure, it sure is. Yeah, I guess when your wife is telling you to F off, it's more than alienates, right?
To the degree that he's a little concerned, and this is Woody we're talking about, or Woody is short for Atwood because he's named for Margaret Atwood,
Yeah,
um,
right.
and and he's a little concerned for his well-being that he has alienated his family so much.
Yeah, I mean, he literally begins to worry that life is going to imitate art, and that his character, who is in deep, his character is investigating his own family, and his character is his family or his wife's family is really corrupt, really dirty business. This is where the sand and gravel stuff comes in. And Woody's got a different problem because his wife's family is really clean. They run a good clean business. But now everybody thinks that he's using his fiction to out his actual in-laws as criminals. And so people are really reading the book, but kind of for the wrong reason.
And he kind of writes himself into a corner.
He writes himself into a corner because he becomes trapped between his own considerable ambitions. He wants to redeem himself, right? He got laid off because it's a little murky, but he might have made up a source or didn't do it on purpose, but they used it as an excuse to can him, and he has a very powerful need to redeem himself, and this is how he's going to do it. And he's made a spin at fiction before, and had what he thinks was a near success with it. But
This would be TikTok, check your sock.
TikTok, check your sock, right? About deranged entomologist. Um, and so he's really wants to do it's really important to his sense of who he is. But unfortunately for him, the better he does with this project, the worse his family life gets. So he's got some choices to make.
And always difficult to do an interview about fiction because you don't want to. We want to avoid as many spoilers as possible. But I think the detail that maybe made me laugh the most was his idea that he was going to get revenge on his very successful family or in-laws or wife's family
Right.
who are so after him to do something honest with his life that he goes to work at the car wash.
Right, the spite job.
Yeah.
Yeah, he takes a spite job, and that ends up to be important to the education of Woody. It really was. I know some people organize their works better than I do, and they do outlines and all that. And I normally never. I just don't do that as a rule. I just kind of plunge in and trust my instincts and hope for the best. But it's a little scary because you don't know where you're going exactly. I was originally was not going to finish the interior novel that he's writing. I didn't think it was necessary. But then I got to this point like, well, I want to know. I want to know how this ends. I guess I better write it.
You said you really started work on this novel 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and it dawns on me that 20 years ago, the newspaper industry was a different place than it is today. It wasn't totally healthy, but it was before the really steep decline.
Right.
And so when you set out to write this, like the idea of the crusading newspaper journalist as hero was a pretty active piece of our culture, and they're kind of an endangered species today.
Yes. Yeah. And that informs this book much more so than it would have if I would have kept writing back then. You're completely right about that, and there's a point where Woody's being questioned about it, exactly that point in his book. Like, aren't you writing ancient history here? Yeah, and then they tap dance around that issue. I guess I wanted the book to partly function as a bit of an epitaph, for something that was pretty cool actually, and left a lot of dislocated journalists out there. I read somewhere, and this was probably 8 years ago or so by now, there were like 70,000 out of work journalists, reporters, photographers, editors around the country with the collapse of the industry. And, could you imagine if that was all concentrated in one area, if it was like coal mining country or something had lost that many jobs? So, I mean, some of the most talented people you'll ever meet, many of whom helped me with this book in the editing process, are no longer doing a job that they were just fantastic at doing. So,
Yeah, there is still something, for as many other kinds of journalism jobs as still exist in ways. there is still something really romantic about the idea of a big or even a small city newsroom kind of firing on all
Yes.
cylinders.
Yeah, that's true. And it's a little, what's the word?
Yeah,
Elegiac.
I know that word too. I don't know how to say it either.
I just can't pronounce it, but I miss that a lot. I mean, I wrote a column in the Post Standard here, but I wrote it in my underwear in the basement, and it just, I mean, most of the time I wore underwear, I guess, and I just didn't really have the same sense of communality and the energy and the ideas. That whole experience is gone, and I'm lucky that I got to experience a fair amount of it, and I feel bad for the kids today who won't.
Well, and in some ways, I think this book, I don't know, does it bear witness to what newspapers once were?
I think so. I think I tried to do that, and I don't think it does it in an overly romantic way either, right? They could be full of backbiting and nastiness, and um,
Fornication in the break
yeah,
room.
right, right, right. The petty politics that you can find it in any business, and newsrooms aren't immune to it. But it is amazing to see people pull together to put a daily paper out. It's just it's a special feeling, to feel like you're part of something bigger, and everybody working so hard under deadline, and then it's over. Then you go have a drink, and then you go do it again the next day. And a lot of times you don't know what you're going to be doing the next day, which was also part of the fun.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you mentioned your time at it was what the Middlesex News, right? In
Yeah, that was where I was at the other night. I was kind of communing with old colleagues from there before I went on. I went on to the L.A. Times and was at the Boston Globe at the same time. I kind of got in the news in the wrong way. I got shot in the L.A. riots when I was on assignment with the Boston Globe.
how did that
And
happen? Who shot you?
they were gang members. I the streets got full very quickly. I didn't plunge into a riot. I didn't know a riot was happening yet, and this is all kind of before cell phones and everything. And I filed a reaction story to the verdict, and then I kind of heard about some disturbance. Everything was news radio. That's how you kind of found out in the moment what was going on, and some disturbance at Florence and Normandy. And I was told, well, try to get there, but don't get hurt. And I never got close, and streets filled up, and somebody tried to drag me out of the car, shot me twice in the leg, and then I drove off. They shot my tires out and made it to a side street, got shot in the upper back. It was a mess. I was lucky to get out of there. But then a couple of families put themselves on the line to help me. This was in South Central LA. So none of that's in my book. I didn't go in there, but it's all kind of part of my bio, and I ended up in California for a long time, and then my wife is from Syracuse, and happy wife, happy life. That's all I'm going to say.
How did you pivot from like such a heavy duty kind of work to humor writing?
Always a bit of a smart ass, class clown. I wrote a humor column in high school. I wrote one in college. I started to realize I was pretty good at it, but I didn't ever think I could get a job doing it until Dave Barry came along, and
Yeah.
then I was just like, oh my God, this can be done. And so I always had my eye on it, and I was a news reporter primarily, but in the early part of my career, but I always had my eye on stories that could make me look like a columnist, and quirky, lighter side of life sorts of things. So yeah, I had been a humor columnist in Framingham, and then I went to LA and I was a reporter. And it wasn't until I got down to the Orange County Register a couple of years or so after the shooting that I started to move toward the humor columnist thing again. And then I did it out here in Syracuse. So it was really, kind of, I mean, I like being a reporter. It's great in a lot of ways. but I felt the the mixing news and humor was something that I could do that was different from everybody else.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I think roughly a third of my personality is due to old Dave Barry columns.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I just devoured everything that came out from him. And then I was like, you got to, I did have, and I still have a bit of similarity in our styles, but I needed to separate myself. Right. And my stuff was always, I would say it was more, not that his stuff was, is not reported because I mean you're reporting on life when you write humor, but I really had more kind of interviews with people in the field and kind of I did a lot of hijinks, right? A lot of stunt journalism and ambush journalism and I got away with murder at some of these places and I really it was just an incredible career, to be able to get up and there was some creative pressure to come up with ideas, but it was just it was terrific,
Well, and I don't think people appreciate how challenging it is to be sort of funny on command. And it's not just being funny, it's being quick on command. You have to do it to a deadline.
Yeah, and it became harder. The news started to take a darker turn, I would say sometime after the Clinton administration, you know, and obviously 9/11 and all that. And it became kind of because you don't want to be tone deaf. You can't be tone deaf to what's going on in the rest of the world. I would say that was the toughest part of it for me was like if you're uh, a regular columnist and you don't have that sort of pressure to be funny, everything is your oyster. You can write about anything you want pretty much, but if you're a humor guy, you have to start calling and throwing things out because they're too dark. So you have to find the things that are in the news or things that are in your life that you can do. But once I had the idea, I was off and running, and it was just great fun.
I feel like Dave Barry existed at least for a long period at a time when you could still poke fun at other people, not necessarily in a mean way, but poke fun. And maybe it was sometime around 9/11 where I think it became, and maybe I'm doing this without any real evidence except for the fact that I've written humor for a long time, that now it's about having to be able to poke fun at yourself and maybe use yourself as a proxy for the things that you might have poked fun
Right,
at otherwise.
right. That's a great point, and I always did a lot of that, both for the reasons you're saying, but also because it gives you a little bit permission to at least you could still make fun of politicians, and it gives you a little permission because, oh, hey, look, I'm making fun of myself too, like lighten up. But you're right. We're like things are a lot more sensitive. I had in the car wash part of the book, I'd initially written things in the African American vernacular, a lot of their dialogue, and I was counseled against it, and I think it was probably the better decision. It makes it's a little less realistic in my view, but we're kind of at the place where no, it's not my place to be writing the way they speak. So, and maybe that's fair. Maybe that's correct.
And Woody is kind of working through the idea. I mean, there are numerous
Yes.
places where like it's pointed out that his characters are all pretty white, and
Yes.
it's almost. I mean, I guess it is a joke that he tries to sort of artificially tone
Yes.
down the whiteness of the novel.
Yes, yes, he's getting all this advice. I mean, one of Woody's problems is he doesn't have a lot of core convictions himself, so he's very amenable to the advice of others. There's a lot of chefs that are stirring the pot in his book, and one of them, several times, it's about the lack of diversity in his book, and so he tries to ameliorate that. Um, and sometimes in very clumsy and funny ways. I would argue they're funny, at least, and that's why um, that's kind of how I sort of dealt with that issue head on, but in a funny way. And he doesn't mean to be exclusionary, right? He's just kind of a clueless white guy.
Right. He doesn't even realize because his protagonist is a guy whose name is Custer, who is a
Yes.
quarter Native American, and he doesn't even recognize the irony until somebody points it out.
Right, right. I don't know. How did you feel about Woody by the time you finished with him? Did you develop some affection for him?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think, in all fairness, there are a lot of us who feel like kind of clueless middle-aged white guys, at least among the clueless middle-aged white guys that I know. He's
Right.
he's trying to do the right thing, right? And finds himself through an untenable situation of his own making, which is kind of how a lot of us go through life.
Yeah, yeah, no kidding. Um, yeah, I feel like that's a big part of the novel is Woody just kind of trying to puzzle through who he is and uh, and maybe grow up a little bit. But he's got a lot to be confused about.
Yeah, he is not a type A personality in any way.
No.
Maybe not even a type B, like a C or D personality.
Yeah, I guess anti-hero. I mean, I always heard when I was writing plays, strong characters make strong plays, but Woody is not a particularly strong character, but he has I will say this, he has strong characteristics. He's got some stubbornness, he got some ambition, he's got some pettiness going. He's got some things driving him.
Okay, so I have to admit I've done a little research, and I have to ask you this question: how was
Yeah.
it that you had never had poutine until last summer?
I don't know. I think I just didn't like the idea of it for some reason. I just was not tempted by it, so I didn't order it. But once I got up into Nova Scotia and I figured, well, if it's not good here, it's not going to be anywhere good anywhere. And then I had it and it was like, oh my gosh, I wish I didn't like this. It's the last thing I need, but it's great.
It is the rare thing that lives up to the hype, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it was better than the hype. I mean, what stuff we had, the place was just called Poutine. Like that was the name of the chain, and we went in there, and there were these just huge boxes of potatoes and big boxes of cheese, unrefrigerated cheese curds. But anyway, somehow they all made it work, and the gravy was so light, and then they had different variations of it, and yeah, yeah, it's awesome.
Well, Jeff Kramer, the book is awesome, and I'm really delighted that we had a chance to chat about it. Best of luck and congratulations.
Really fun, and thank you, and anytime.
Jeff Kramer's new book is called Mud Season. It is out now. You can find out where to get it and more about Jeff Kramer himself, including why he had never eaten poutine up until recently, by going to ncpr.org/northwards. Ethan Chanty back with us in the studio. Metafiction. I don't know what I was going to say about that, except that maybe we should do a podcast about this podcast.
I think we should. And hold on. I was not expecting him to talk about getting shot.
This is absolutely right. Well, I guess I had read that this was part of his backstory,
Right.
and that he brought it up. I think gave us license to talk about it. Yeah, obviously a lot more serious than a lot of the stuff that happens in the book. But I guess what struck me was how matter of fact he talks about it. I mean, it happened years ago, but still, it's just. I think about all the various assignments that I did over the course of a career in journalism covering wildfires, and there were times where, like, theoretically, my life might have been in danger if I had done things differently, but never.
You were never really in a dangerous situation.
No, not like that. Not even remotely like that. Yeah.
Me neither. I mean, I'm not a reporter. I've never been a reporter. I've been in lots of dangerous situations that I put myself in because I'm an idiot, and travel long distances very late at night when everyone is sleep deprived. But that's about it. I've never got shot at, I don't think.
Ethan, you just want. I feel like we should just get to the closing credits and be done with it.
Yeah, let's do it. Oh, that's your
you
cue?
do those, yeah.
I'm going to leave that in. Northwards is an NCPR podcast production. The show is written, produced, and edited by Mitch Tyke with digital production supervision by me, Ethan Shanty. To hear more conversations and to support this show, visit ncpr.org/northwards. This is NCPR, North Country Public Radio.